share my screen here. Can everyone see that okay? That looked good.
Yeah.
Okay, so tonight I'm just going to give a bit of a kind of brief talk and demo of how we automate infrastructure at the BBC with AWS CDK, and also just a bit about how we got to this point and picked the tool we used. And then after a little bit of talk, we'll have some demo and hopefully some live deployments, which I decided to go with, a little bit risky, but it should be fine because we've automated everything. So just a little bit about me before we get started. I'm a software engineer on Team Hamilton, which sits within the BBC's Voice and AI team. I work within the data domain, and as a collective, we work on Beeb, which is the world's first public service voice assistant. It got a bit of press recently, and you'll be able to Google if you're interested in seeing that as it progresses. Mostly day to day, I work with TypeScript, JavaScript, and Terraform, and in a previous life, I was a Ruby developer for about 8 years. If you want to find me on Twitter or GitHub, it's @Provan there. Yeah, and this is what I'm working on day to day. So Beeb's in beta at the moment, and we're currently working to bring it out to more platforms. So the problem we had, so I've been a part of the Voice and AI team for about 2 years now, and we've evolved quite a lot, having started from just real no technology, so it was quite a greenfield project. So we've kind of had these iterations and changes, and we've made decisions along the way and had to change them, and are always kind of striving to get continuously better. So the question we had for ourselves was, how can we best manage the infrastructure we need to run our applications? And I can extend to that as, can we do this in a way that also includes our application code, so we don't have kind of separate projects to manage all this? So first off, just why would we use a tool to kind of automate our projects? So we're kind of looking for a few key things here. So we want repeatability. We want to be able to repeat deployments and be confident that what we do will result in the same outcome. We're looking for testability. So can we write tests ahead of time that will allow us to kind of predict what's going to happen and also catch changes before they cause issues? And generally, all this kind of ties towards safety. So we want deployments to be safe as possible, which kind of allows us to move as fast as possible and basically not be scared of shipping, which I think is a kind of big thing for me in software. So by using a tool to manage infrastructure, we can be a lot more confident in these 3 areas, as opposed to something like just using the AWS UI, which is great for messing around with things. But really, once we get into a point of wanting to deliver software, we want to automate this. There's a great book on this by Keith Morris called Infrastructure as Code. I think it's available on O'Reilly and Amazon and all the usual places. But yeah, this is a great book for me and kind of getting into this world and getting away from just having servers that were kind of manually managed, and when things went wrong, it was really hard to diagnose. So I'd recommend this to anyone who wants to kind of look further into this topic. So just to talk about the journey about how we got to where we are now with CDK. At the kind of start, so to go back a step, Cloudformation is AWS's kind of template language for basically being able to define infrastructure in a repeatable way. It kind of looks a little bit like JSON. We used that at the start, and we manually updated these templates by hand, and these were sent off to AWS through the API, which has a little bit of a caveat, and that if they get beyond a certain size, you can't do that, and you have to switch to using something like an S3 bucket, but we'll get onto that. This is great to start off with. It gives you the kind of safety and repeatability, but it's just very verbose. You have to write a lot of code for not very much, and we'll see later on how that solves by using CDK. We moved on from this to a tool called TROPOSPHERE, which is a Python library that generates CloudFormation. It's an improvement. It's less verbose. You can write less code and end up with more template code. It's kind of easier to extract. So there's a typo, it should say patterns. It's easier to extract common patterns out. So if you have a set of infrastructure that you use, maybe it's like a log metric or a log group, you can define that in one place and just pass parameters into it to reuse it. The big downside to that is now we also have to manage a Python environment. I'm not a Python developer, so that was kind of a big hurdle for me. So when we started searching for a solution, there's a kind of couple of key points we wanted to tick off. So on the Voice and AI team at the BBC, we use a monorepo. So all our code across the department is in the one repository on GitHub. And we have some kind of tooling around that to make that quite easy to work with. So we wanted a solution that would fit in with that quite easy and not have to do anything too off the beaten path. And we wanted kind of something lightweight but powerful. So we didn't want to be pulling in huge libraries and just bloating everything up. So this is kind of where CDK comes in. So CDK stands for Cloud Development Kit, and it allows us to define CloudFormation stacks using our favorite programming language. So this is it supports Python, C#, Java, JavaScript, and the thing that got me really excited was TypeScript. I find it just really easy for managing big projects, and it makes interaction with CDK very easy with type definitions and things like that. So it's developed by AWS, which is very good because it's updated really regularly. There's some slight downsides to that, which I found when I was putting together some code for the demo later on, but we'll get into that. It has support for resources across all AWS products, and as it's updated regularly, as new products get added to AWS, they end up in CDK pretty quickly. What's good as well is it's kind of best practices built in using sensible defaults. So you'll find that with CloudFormation, you'd write a lot of, say, for example, if you wanted a Lambda in CloudFormation, you'd have to define every single aspect that Lambda has. So like memory, timeouts, logging, you can have to define all that and be very verbose. CDK lets you like REST code by just saying, I'd like a Lambda, and you can give it the options you want to give it. Some are mandatory, like the code, for example, or the handler. But the rest is kind of made up of sensible defaults to get you started quicker. But you can also go in and tune those. So CDK provides us with constructs, and this is a kind of key core concept in CDK. So they provide us with classes that represent CloudFormation resources. And when you use these classes, that's when you get the benefit of most of the sensible defaults being produced in the background. So we don't have to provide every single configuration value that, for example, a CloudFormation template requires. So just a quick example here to show you some code. This is how you would define a Lambda function in CDK. For those not familiar, AWS Lambda is kind of their, to use a buzzword, serverless offering. So you can run a variety of languages like JavaScript, TypeScript, without having to worry about the infrastructure underneath. So here you can see I'm importing the Lambda from CDK. CDK is very nice because it's split up into packages. So there's a separate package for each AWS product. So you don't have to pull in this massive library if you just want to use Lambda functions. There's some chat on the CDK GitHub that this might change in future to a kind of monorepo approach, but there's a massive GitHub issue with various sides chiming in why that's a good or a bad idea. But for the moment, it's kind of segmented out. So you can see here, I've got a function. This stuff will become relevant later on, but it's called my function. I'm using node 12 to run it. My entry point's index.handler, and I've got a local zip file with the code, and I'm telling CDK to use that. And what's really nice is CDK will actually handle taking that zip file and sending it up to AWS, so you don't even have to worry about making sure the code gets there. So this is what makes it really nice to go alongside your infrastructure code. To take it a step further, just to show how you can kind of integrate different services very easily, say we have that Lambda function there, we need to attach it to a DynamoDB table because we want to store some data. We create our DynamoDB table slightly the same way, and then all we have to do to give the Lambda permission to access the DynamoDB table is add its resource policy using the table ARN. So it's very simple, and this will go off and generate the necessary IAM permissions in the background so that everything has permission. So you have the examples I showed there were of kind of what you call top-level CDK classes, and these are things that have been ported over to be made really easy and using a simple interface. There is a few things. So this is things like APIGATEWay, LAMBDA, DynamoDB, EC2, S3 to kind of name the big ones, and there's loads more. There is a couple of classes that are still kind of lingering around that are prefixed with the CFN. So these are things that have not yet been ported to like a kind of fully wrapped CDK class. And they still look a lot like CloudFormation code, and you still have to provide all that details. So for example here, if you want to use AWS Elasticsearch, you'll notice here that it's a CFN class. this means we have to kind of pass all the things we pass to CloudFormation. It's a bit more verbose, but you still get the kind of option, you still get the benefit of TypeScript to be able to show you what interface and what things you need to pass in. But this was more prevalent at the kind of start of the project, and as time goes on and as more and more releases happen, this has become less of an issue as they move stuff across. I've given this talk a few times. I double checked before this that this is still the case for at least this example. CDK gives us testing out of the box, which is very nice. So integrates with, I think integrates with a few testing frameworks. We only really use Jest at the BBC, integrates with that nicely. So this example here, you might want to test that a queue has a message retention period of 100 this year. So basically what you do is you create a new stack, you create your queue. This would be something that you've created yourself, and then you would you can basically just do expectations. Like I expect my stack to have a resource with this property. So that's really nice for catching things up front. I should say before we're using CDK, I found it very frustrating to just have to deploy changes to see what would happen. This gives you a bit more predictability. You can also do snapshot testing. So the idea within snapshot testing is you would create your stack, you would take a snapshot of the CloudFormation stack that generates, and you'd say it would match. So you'd run the test once, it will generate a snapshot. And if you were to make a change and run the test again, the test would fail because the snapshot that's been saved doesn't match the CloudFormation template that's been generated. So this is really good, for example, if you've got all your infrastructure you need, but you're not quite happy with the code that generates it, you maybe want to do a refactor. You can take a snapshot of your stack, and then you can refactor safely against that snapshot because you're shown that you can get the same thing out the other end. CDK ships with a CLI, which is mostly how you interact with it. A couple of commands that are useful here is, first off, bootstrap. When CDK deploys templates, it makes use of an S3 bucket that it creates via the bootstrap command. And the benefit of using this S3 bucket is all your assets and templates go in there before they're passed on to CloudFormation. And this gets around to the issue that we had where the API has a size limit on your template. So once it gets to a certain size, you can no longer use the API to update it. Deploy, fairly straightforward. That will take your stack and deploy it to your AWS account, which I'll show after this. Synth is also a useful one. It will actually just print out the raw CloudFormation that's generated to your terminal. That's really good for doing stuff like debugging and just sanity checking. The final command that I find quite useful is diff. So if you've made changes to your stack locally, you can actually do a diff against the stack as it is in your AWS account, and you'll be able to see what is added and removed, and the implications of that. You'll be able to see if things need replaced or they can just be updated in place. So that's quite a nice one as a final check before you do your deploy. The documentation for CDK is actually very good. You can find it at this link. I think these slides will be shared after. Otherwise, you can just Google it. But you have all your packages around the side that you can see you use, and you can go through and see exactly how things should be interacted with. It just makes life easy. And I find that with TypeScript, I don't have much experience of using it just with kind of Node on its own, but with TypeScript, I really find the benefits because you can get all the autocomplete and nice things like that. There's also a kind of guide that's in a completely different place from the docs. I think AWS tends to use that quite a lot, but it kind of can take you through some best practices. I guess it's like more of a CDK book than it would be just to dive into the docs, but it just depends on how you learn. So hopefully this goes well, but if I just dive into a bit of a demo, my mouse has went to sleep. So I've got this project here called JS Exchange, and I have to find a couple of stacks here that we should go through. So one thing that we wanted to be able to do was to be able to manage one stack, but deploy it in both a staging and a production environment. So you can see we do that here. I'll dive into the stack in a second, but the kind of core concept of, let me get that a bit bigger there. The core concept of CDK is you create an application and you add stacks to that application. So you can see here, I have this class called JS Exchange stack, which is where all my resources are defined. This is called the staging JS Exchange stack. I've got a deployment environment I pass in and some tags just to make it easy to see. You'll notice here I also have a production stack. And if I dive into this here, it's a fairly basic stack. I just put it together so that we can actually show some kind of live deployments and some of the things you can do because it's in TypeScript and not just like a templating language. So I'm creating a new Lambda function that has some code that comes from the same directory. So if you see on the left-hand side here, here we have a really basic Lambda that sends a response, say hello from JavaScript Exchange, and it should print the environment that it's been deployed from with a status code of 200. Previously, I found with other things, you'd have this a bit more separated from your infrastructure code, but I quite like that it's all in the same place. We have some basic options in here. We don't have to pass these in, but you can be as verbose as you like. So we have a log retention policy. So if we're on staging environment, where we just want to retain logs for a week, if we're on live, we can retain them for 2 years in case you want to kind of, you have any kind of data protection guidelines there. We specify the handler function, runtime. What's really nice about TypeScript with this is you can just see all the runtimes they provide in there, so you can use all those languages for your Lambda. We have a function name named based on the deployment environment, and we set the deployment environment as a variable there. And this part here is really cool. So with CloudFormation, you'd have to set up a full REST API, give it all its parameters, and then attach it to the Lambda. Because CDK can provide these kind of higher level abstractions, we can just make use of the built-in Lambda REST API construct, which essentially lets us invoke a Lambda using an HTTP API, which I think is a fairly common way of using Lambda. So we have a function we pass in, we give the REST API name, we say the stage name is the deployment environment, so that'll be staging or production, and we've got some CORS details here we can configure. So if that should be readable there. If I run list, I can see all the stacks that are managed by this project. Give it a second. So I've got a production JS Exchange stack and a staging JS Exchange stack. I want to do diff. If I can type properly, that'd be good. So that'll go off to AWS and just pull down the template and do a bit of detection on there. So there's no differences. So let's make a change to that just to see what we can do here. So if we want to change the timeout on the Lambda, want to change the timeout to a minute on there. We can save that. And if we do a diff again, there you go. You'll see that the tilde means change. Sometimes there's certain attributes you can't change on a piece of AWS infrastructure without having to replace it, but it'll let you know if it has to do that. So at this point here, it's just changed, so that's fine. So we can just go ahead and run deploy on that. And this is the part I've been worried about, but this should be fine. So it creates a CloudFormation change set. At this point, it'll tell you if there's changes to be made or not, and it'll go ahead and execute them. So there we go. This is basically just output from CloudFormation. If I open Firefox, so this is a CloudFormation dashboard, you'll be able to see that an update's in progress here. So yeah, so basically ties, and anything you'll see in this CloudFormation panel will be reflected in the CLI. So it's taking a little bit longer than it did. There we go. Update cleanup complete. So that's fine. So it's updated the stack, and we have a nice output from the stack, which is the REST endpoint API. So if I click on this, there we go. So we get a nice bit of JSON, hello from JavaScript staging environment. So at this point in your development cycle, you might be, okay, we're happy with that. It's been tested. We want to go ahead and deploy production. So that stack doesn't actually exist just now, but just by running deploy, filter should pick it up in a second. So this is when you create a new stack or you make changes to a stack that result in IAM policy changes, which is Amazon's kind of security configuration. You'll be asked to confirm these things. You can auto confirm this if you're using an environment like Jenkins, where there's not going to be user input, but it's just nice to check over these things. This is another good thing CDK gives you. You don't have to go, if you're using a Lambda with an API gateway, you don't have to go and tell it and explicitly to give it access. It'll just assume and work out what access it needs to give it. So I can hit yes on that. This publish thing here actually is just the code from a Lambda being zipped and passed up. So that'll create a change set, creating a stack in progress. We can see it here. So all being well, this should create, and we should have an API endpoint in the production environment. That's just a really nice example of how you can go from environment to environment. There's more advanced concepts like pipelines to do this sort of stuff, but I haven't actually had a chance to work with that yet. I think this is quite a lightweight solution, and we find it quite accessible. While that's deploying, one thing I noticed when I mentioned that they move quite fast, sometimes they break things. So I had some tests here for this stack. So I have a snapshot test and a Lambda test. For some reason, the assertion library isn't working at the moment. I had a bit of a panic earlier on until I went into GitHub issues, and other people had the same problems. That always makes me feel better. So but this is like an example of how you do a test. We're basically the same way. When we create our stack, we expect it to have one Lambda function. All right, and you can go as deep as you want on that. You can say a Lambda function with a certain name or a certain any property on there, but I couldn't get that working at the moment, which is a little bit frustrating. If you go back here, you can see that it's just creating all the things, the stack or log retention. So that looks like it's about to complete. So yep, so if we hit this endpoint here, you'll notice it's the same API point, but it's got a production stage on it. Hey, there we go. So we have hello from JavaScript Exchange production environment. So yeah, so hopefully that's been useful for you. Just if you use CDK before, there might be some tips. If you haven't, it's a nice introduction. But yeah, thanks very much. I think we're going to do questions now.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That was brilliant. We do have one question from Mikhail. He does say, apologies up front if you missed this part in the talk. Do you still have DevOps/Ops teams maintaining that or full maintenance of these AWS services that are composed by CDK are done by the team?
Yeah, so all our infrastructure is managed by the team. We do have like an on-call rota for these things, but that's all within the team as well. So we do have a kind of separate ops team, but that only comes into play when issues happen with our infrastructure that affects users of any of the kind of BBC's products. But everything's all infrastructure is kind of managed on the team.
Brilliant, thank you. I think that's